Hey, Rowan Waters here. So, Rush is one of those bands that you either love or you hate. There are very few people in the in-between. Coming out as a mid-70s pastiche of the sounds of the harder blues rock bands of the late 60s and early 70s like Cream and Led Zeppelin, the band quickly adopted a more complex and progressive style that seemed to lie somewhere on the spectrum between Black Sabbath and Emerson, Lake and Palmer, if that's possible. And they thus helped lay the foundation for what would eventually become progressive metal. The peak of this early progressive period is the classic fan favorite 2112. And following this was a series of softer and, more progressive albums more akin to Yes or King Crimson than Led Zeppelin or Deep Purple. And it's in this post-2112 period that today's album lies. A Farewell to Kings is Rush's 5th studio album and their 6th overall, counting the live album All the World's a Stage. It was actually their first album to go gold in the US, being certified 2 months after it came out. The album is a collection of 6 songs that span from the 2.5 minute long Madrigal to the 11-minute Xanadu. And together the 6 songs clock in at just over 37 minutes, so even if for some people some of the epics, the 2 epics, might drag out a little bit, the album itself doesn't really overstay its welcome. It's a nice little tendency that was present in the early Rush albums where even if you had a 20-minute song, the album wouldn't be longer than like 40 minutes. So regardless of the progressiveness of it, that's always a little nice touch where you can just sit down and enjoy an album, for a little bit instead of having to devote like 2 hours to it or something. The songs cover a wide array of textures from the more typical hard rock sound that the band is known for, mixed with some acoustic segments and acoustic songs, and even the first major instances of synthesizer use in Rush album. I mean, obviously, the synthesizer would become a more central part of the band's sound in later years, as best exemplified by their super mega hit, Tom Sawyer, from the album Moving Pictures in 1982. But as a result of this variety, and also with the varieties in moods presented by the various instrumental intros, instrumental outros, and instrumental interludes, the album feels fresh all the way through. Like, there's never a point in time that I felt like I was bored. Like, I've listened to this album a few times now, like quite a few times, and there was never a point where I was like, I'm not enjoying myself. This is way too dragged out. This is way too bloated. The album never felt like that for me. This album is really, in fact, quite good. The title track, which serves as the album opener, opens with acoustic guitars that give way to the harder electric guitars about 1 minute in, and it's at this point, even early in the album, once the song really starts to get going, that you can see the musical prowess of each member of the band. They're playing the riffs, they're doing what they do, they're seamlessly and effortlessly going through different time signatures, switching between 3/4 and 4/4 and even 5/4 at some parts of the song. And you can just really notice the excellent musicianship of the band. The song already displays many of the textural tendencies that you'll see later on in the album. Maybe not all of the moods and not every single sound that you hear, but most of what you will hear on the album is already laid out in that first title track in terms of different instruments or textures. And, no song really feels out of place after this, Like, the quality is consistent and nothing feels thrown out of left field. So once you get through A Farewell to Kings, the title track, you can just sit back and relax and and I'm not gonna say you can predict that the album's not predictable, but you can sit back in comfort knowing that they're not gonna try to pull out some sort of super weird, uber experimental sound out of their asses. They're gonna maintain it within the spectrum of progressive rock as it was in the late 70s. The band is also really adept at putting short songs next to mid-paced and even epic-length songs, which I think is an art that has been lost, sadly. It's a skill, really, to be able to balance out longer and shorter songs in a way that feels natural. Man, Rush are really good at doing that. You know, the two epics, Xanadu and Cygnus X1, Book 1, are definitely the highlights of the album and are really a showcase for the band's talent as musicians and Neil Peart's talent as a lyricist. And what's cool actually about Cygnus is that it tells a story of a man, you know, traveling through space, and the story seems to end tragically, but then later gets picked up during the title track of their next album, Hemispheres, where the story is shown to not have ended the way it seemed to have ended here on A Farewell to Kings. So it's a nice little touch that they were able to continue a story in a different album, which is a great thing, because for me personally, I always seem to link concept albums and progressive rock together. So the fact that there are progressive bands that don't do concept albums, which I guess technically is most of them, or at least, you know, not all their albums are concept albums, it really frees up your ability, or I guess their ability, to make songs about whatever they want and make a song about a story here that they can later pick up in a different album without having to make the entire album like a sequel or something, like how King Diamond, but not really progressive rock, but King Diamond did Abigail, and then later on, some 20-some years later, he did Abigail 2, you know? The whole first Abigail album was centered around that story. The whole second Abigail album was centered around this story. In contrast to that, here Rush did one song of this album and one song of the other album, and none of the other songs have to tie into it. That's great. And it's really cool that they're able to do that so effectively. But yeah, so this album is good. It's great, really. Honestly, the only reasons I could see people not liking it are reasons that they don't like Rush or even progressive rock in general. Like maybe they don't like Geddy Lee's voice. That's a big turnoff for a lot of people. They don't like the super pretentious, drawn-out progressive suites that last 10 to 20 minutes. They're not into that. They're more into concise songs. Maybe they don't like the complex rhythms of them, you know, being in weird time signatures or shifting between time signatures, even if at some point they land in 4/4. And, you know, so those people aren't really gonna like this. They're not gonna just be like, I hate all of Rush, I hate all of progressive rock, but I do like this album or this song. Or maybe they will. I don't know. I mean, there are songs on here that aren't overtly progressive, you know, like Closer to Your Heart or Madrigal, I don't feel like are super representative of the progressive rock genre. And so, you know, if you're a Rush fan, you'll more than likely like this album. If you're not, but you still like progressive rock that sounds like it came out of the late 70s, then you'll most likely like this album. If you don't, then maybe you might not like this album. You might still, for whatever reason that I can't fathom, but I don't know. The only thing I know is that I enjoy this album. I think it is a pretty solid piece of work. Definitely the highlights are the two epics and Closer to the Heart. And with this in mind, even though it's super strong and consistent, I don't think it's Rush's greatest work. And so, with this in mind, I think I give the album a solid 8.5 out of 10. And, excuse me, that's my rating. Bye. Kind of ironic that I'm talking about progressive music while being decked out in punk merchandise, given how the two are basically polar opposites of each other. But hey, why not?